University criminologist Dr. James Fox will help us make sense of it all. His book, Extreme Killing, Understanding Serial and Mass Murder. Also with us, former prosecutor and CBS News legal analyst Wendy Murphy and criminal defense attorney Paula Canny, who has worked on similar cases. But first, let's check in with Beth Karras at the courthouse for all the latest. Beth, what are the headlines from today?
Well, the only witness to testify today, and he is still on the stand, is Dr. Wade Myers. He's from Tampa, Florida. He is a psychiatrist who did an evaluation of Cody Posey for the prosecution, and he is saying something very different from the defense expert witnesses, the defense psychologists. He has opined, although he's now on cross-examination, that Cody Posey was not in fear of death or great bodily harm when he killed his family. He did not lose his mind. He was not overwhelmed by emotions. He had the specific intent to kill each of his family members. He was capable of weighing his choices. He had no uncontrollable impulses. The list goes on and on. Very different from what the defense expert said. He's now on cross-examination, but when I came outside, the court was in yet another sidebar. In fact, I think the jury may have even stepped out for a few minutes, and the lawyers are arguing. This has been the case all day long. The jury's been in and out of the courtroom, a lot of sidebars, a lot of arguments trying to limit the testimony of Dr. Myers or make sure that he doesn't step over the line and cause a mistrial. The judge did say a mistrial with prejudice if this witness talks about the credibility of Cody Posey and what he believed or didn't believe.
Yeah, and I noticed today in watching a lot of those arguments outside the presence of the jury, the prosecutor and the defense attorney, Gary Mitchell, who have had a pretty good relationship throughout this contentious case, getting a little testy now as the trial is drawing towards a close. We have a soundbite of Dr. Wade Myers on the stand. Let's take a look.
I thought the degree of planning and organization as far as carrying it out and then trying to cover it up afterwards was very extensive, and the way he was able to carry that out in a fairly rational manner, I suppose, is the best way I can put it, and continue that over the next few days and essentially coming across as his normal self after he's wiped out his family.
You know, Beth, it's amazing that educated psychologists and psychiatrists can look at the same case, can look at the same facts, because the facts really are not all that much in dispute. Cody Posey concedes he was the gunman who shot and killed his father, his stepmother, and his stepsister, but come to completely different conclusions as to what was going on in that 14-year-old's mind at the time that he pulled the trigger 5 times and killed those 3 people. Beth, can compare and contrast for us, if you would, this expert's testimony on behalf of the state with the expert testimony that we've already heard on behalf of the defense.
Well, I think, to put it very simplistically, the defense experts credited what Cody said about the abuse. The longest testifying defense expert, Christine Johnson, talked to numerous people, many other witnesses called by the defense and more, to prepare her 46-page report and reach her conclusions. What Gary Mitchell is doing right now, I mean, as we're speaking, when he's doing his cross-examination, he's bringing out that Dr. Myers did not consider a lot of the same stuff, and he did virtually none of his own interviews. He just interviewed Paul Posey's brother Verlin and Stephen Kennedy, who was Marilee, the stepsister's half-brother from a different marriage. He did not consider or even have the information that a lot of the defense witnesses offered in this case about their own experiences witnessing the abuse or evidence of the abuse. So while he's coming to a very different conclusion, he's not working with the same information the defense witnesses are.
And that's
the defense experts are.
And absolutely, that's a very important distinction and great grounds for cross-examination. Let's take a look at this quick soundbite from one of the defense psychologists who testified in this case.
What made Cody act out this time? What caused him to no longer be able to control his emotions? And I think it was the attempted sexual assault that sort of created very intense emotions, an upwelling of fear, of anger, of feeling like he just couldn't tolerate it anymore. And I think that was one of the precipitating circumstances.
All right, Dr. Fox, is there middle ground here? Is it possible both that Cody Posey, age 14, after a significant history of abuse, no matter how severe it was, I think both sides have to concede there was some abuse, both that he snapped and that he intended to kill his family when he did?
Well, first of all, people don't snap. That's sort of a common phrase that we throw out there. And in this particular case, we're talking about someone who did plan. Sure, we can understand the emotions at the time. And I think...
Well, wait a second. What's the evidence of planning? Why do you say that?
Well, after the crime, he did indeed go through the process of trying to cover up. I mean, if someone is so emotionally distraught, feels no option, no alternative but to kill, then after the fact, there should be some expression, or they should be calling the police, saying, this is what I did it because of this reason. But the fact that he did cover it up, tried to bury the evidence, indeed went to a friend and spent a couple days happily, merrily on his way, suggests that he was quite comfortable with what he did. But I think what's more important than all the abuse is the fact that he's 14 years old. I mean, this is not a 24-year-old. A 24-year-old, we would expect that person, if they were the subject of abuse, to call the authorities, to try to find some resolution for the problem other than using homicide. Now, 14-year-olds have a very different view of the world. It may be that he didn't see a lot of options. So I think that his age is a very important factor here, much more important than whatever abuse occurred.
Well, Paula Canny, on the defense side, would you be arguing that this boy just snapped, that he lost control of his ability to function rationally?
Well, the way that I would do it, because under New Mexico law, the prosecution has to prove that whatever occurred without lawful justification. I would ultimately argue that the prosecution failed to meet that burden of proof, that they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that he did it without some lawful justification. And I would argue that all of the history of the abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, and just all of the tragedies of this young 14-year-old's life caused him to not be able to think like a normal person. And what happened to him over the course of his life, one would expect he wouldn't be a normal person. What child at 14 would ever expect a father to beat on him and beat on him and beat on him, ultimately asked him to have sex with his stepmother? And that's a critical fact. And that fact is also corroborated by the amount of incest pornography on the computer. So to go back to the experts, that expert that the prosecution has put on has only seen Cody for, 8 hours and didn't do any of the work that the defense experts did. So, I mean, I think the jury is going to dismiss the prosecution expert as not being credible. I hope
Dr. Fox, just back to you briefly before the break. When you say that people don't snap, I think most people would think it's common sense. If a 14-year-old is branded, actually branded with a burning tool because he says to his father that he doesn't want to have sex with his stepmother, and this is the culmination of a lifetime of abuse, I think most of us think, my gosh, 14 years old, I would have snapped if that happened to me.
But the idea is that someone suddenly has its instant reaction to everything that's been happening for years, that's false. What we have is a long-term history of abuse. We'll assume that right now. But there are other ways in which he could have and should have resolved the situation. We don't want to send a message to, unfortunately, lots of kids out there who are abused by their parents, that it's open season on killing the parents. It's not. If he were in the throes of abuse, if the father was coming at him with an axe, then yes, we can justify under self-defense him defending himself. But in this situation, he becomes the aggressor. There are other avenues for him to have taken. Now, the fact that he's 14 years old and therefore doesn't quite have the same ability as you or I to make good decisions.
Doesn't quite have the same ability? Doesn't quite have the same ability? And Wendy, I'm going to get to you after the break on the issue of premeditation, but I think this is an extreme case with extreme facts. It won't necessarily be a lesson or be precedent precedent for any other case, regardless of how the jury rules in this one. Well, don't go away. There's much more right after this quick break. And still ahead tonight, Neil Entwistle was seen leaving his family's home outside of England. The funeral for his murdered wife and daughter is tomorrow. We'll get an update from across the pond. Plus, this dominatrix is no longer tied up in a courtroom. Her manslaughter trial is over, and wait till you hear how things turned out. Stay with us.
Every weeknight at 8.
We are back with all the latest on the Cody Posey murder trial. The prosecution is in a tough position now, trying to prove a negative after compelling defense testimony from 30 or 40 witnesses that Cody Posey was brutally abused by his father. The prosecution is now trying to show that he wasn't. One of their good witnesses on that point, I think, was Verlin Posey. He was the brother of one of the victims, Paul Posey. And here's a little summary of his testimony. He says that he never heard Paul Posey call Cody any names. He says Paul was proud and often praised Cody, that Cody was punished for misbehaving, but he wasn't abused, and that Cody told Paul that all he wanted to do was to hang out with his friends, be with his girlfriend, and get high. All right, Wendy Murphy, I got to tell you, he lost me on that last one. What 14-year-old tells his own father, you know, Dad, I just want to get high, especially an abusive father? I mean, come on.
Yeah, leave me alone. I want to go get high with my girlfriend. Look, I don't think he's altogether the most sympathetic 14-year-old, but I got to tell you something else. I don't think the defense expert is necessarily going to win because they had 30 people they interviewed and the prosecution only interviewed a handful. Defense witnesses who claim to know for sure whether the kid was abused or not are a dime a dozen, and I think this isn't news flash, but defense witnesses sometimes lie. I don't care. I don't think the jury's going to say, well, they had more, they had less, so this side wins. I think it's a much more complex question than that. But I tell you, the defense attorneys reap what they sow, and I think they're going to be responsible for the verdict if this kid is convicted. And I got a soft spot for kids. I don't think that they are necessarily
you do,
as...
Wendy. That's why I thought this might be a hard case for you.
It is a hard case for me. I got 5 kids of my own. I happen to have a 14-year-old. Their brains aren't even done growing yet. We can't hold them as morally responsible as we do adults. I mean, the younger a person is, the more we have to hold the adults responsible who are supposed to be raising them with love and affection and responsible care and so on. But here's why I think the defense attorneys are going to reap what they sow when they start complaining that this poor kid didn't get a fair shake. What about all those 14-year-olds having sex with the little blonde teacher down in Florida or New York or all around the country?
What does that have to do with this case, Wendy?
Let me explain to you. In almost every case that I've debated on this show or any other show, the 14-year-old boy having sex with his grown-up adult blonde cutie pie teacher, the defense attorney said, 14-year-olds are old enough to make these decisions. They're capable of having sex with whomever they want. We got to abandon these rules about statutory rape and so on because we got to respect the rights of 14-year-olds. They're basically capable of making any and all decisions. And yet, in a case like this, they say, 14-year-olds are just little children. We can't hold them to the same standards.
Well, I don't think we should hold them to the same standards in any situation legally.
Well, thank you. I agree with you right there.
I always think it's the blonde's fault. So, Beth Karras, along those lines, blonde's a blonde, let me bring you back in because weighing the testimony so far in terms of whether Cody Posey was abused, it seems to me the defense has much stronger witnesses. They got witnesses in a position to know, people who were around the ranch day after day, like the ranch hands who saw quite a bit of abuse. We've got friends of Cody Posey's, the friends' parents. We've got teachers. On the prosecution side, those who say that the kid was not abused, we've got Paul Posey's brother, we've got a feed supplier, we've got Paul Posey's boss, people who I would not expect to see that kind of abuse.
That's exactly where the defense was going with the cross-examination of the first 4 witnesses. Dr. Myers is the 5th. I expect there'll be more of these witnesses who will say that they saw no evidence of abuse, name-calling on the part of either Paul or Treon. But the defense will cross them all, as they have been, about whether or not they were there on a regular basis. I do not believe, although I don't know everyone on that list, I don't recognize all names on the state's rebuttal list, I don't believe any of them are former ranch hands, workers there, people who had much more daily contact with the family. So far, these are people who had maybe once every 2 to 3 months personal contact, although the livestock feed supplier was once every 6 weeks. I mean, that's not a lot compared to Slim, and Pilo, the ranch hands who were there daily for months.
All right, we're going to continue to follow this one. Dr. James Fox, Paula Canny, and Beth Karras, thank you so much. Wendy, you got to stick around. Up next, all eyes are on Neil Entwistle's